Hi, Pastor Steve here with Scrolls, Stones, and Scriptures. It's a beautiful day in beautiful Visalia, California. We are studying the life of Abram, and we are in the section of the Bible where Abram and Sarah first move into the land of Canaan. I'm going to start today by reading the scripture, and then we'll unpack it. Sometimes I do it the opposite way, but I think it works better today to get the story out in front of us. So, pardon me, I am reading to you from Genesis 12:10 through 13:4, relatively short. So now there was a famine in the land. Remember, Abram and Sarah have just gotten to Canaan. And Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. And as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. And then they will kill me, but they will let you live. There's a little insight into the Egyptians. Say you are my sister so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. That's a problematic scripture for Christians and some Jewish people also. Abram is prostituting his wife in order to save his own life. When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman, and when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. Pharaoh treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. What have you done to me? He said. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister, so that I took her to be my own wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go. And then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram became very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. So let's talk about what is oftentimes a difficult scripture for a variety of reasons for Christians to understand or get their minds around. It may be that if you're watching this podcast, you've never really heard that story because preachers oftentimes just skip it in church. They work around it or don't pay any attention to it because what are you going to do with the father of your faith tradition prostituting his wife to the Pharaoh in Egypt? That's a really difficult thing to understand and get around to. But this Bible study is made for that exact same type of question and difficulty, and we'll get around to answering it today. So first, a little historical context, and this is really important, and that is that the drought in Canaan land drove Abram from there into Egypt, and Egypt didn't have a drought. And the reason Egypt didn't have a drought was because Egypt's headwaters were in Africa, and the headwaters for Canaan and indeed clear over to Mesopotamia were in different places, different mountains. So Egypt, throughout ancient history, was often the least affected by disruptions in weather patterns and droughts because the Nile flows again from Africa, and you could have a severe drought in and around the area of what is present-day Israel and that section of the world, and not have a drought in Africa, which means that Egypt got water. So it was not uncommon, and in fact, jumping way ahead in the story, this propensity and blessing of Egypt not to suffer such severe droughts, it'll end up being a part of the push and pull that happens between Egyptians and Canaanites, or followers of Yahweh, the Israelites. We should also note at this point in the story, we begin a part of the narrative that will recur over and over again. In the Old Testament explanation of how we came to know Yahweh and to be his people, Egypt plays a really potent and important role. With Abram and Sarai, and with all of the patriarchs, with Joseph, Moses, the place of Egypt in the early history of the chosen people is a big deal. And I want to suggest to you that a part of the way we should understand that is that the mention of Egypt and the constant back and forth between the people of God and Egypt, the nation, has to do with the symbolic role that Egypt plays in our understanding of God and how to serve God. Egypt is always the big boy on the block, the wealthiest of the nations or empires around, and they represent what modern Christians would refer to as the world. So in modern Christianity, we frequently talk about, you can either serve Christ or the world. You have to make a choice between the values that Christ tells you to pursue and the values of the world. Egypt is the world. They worshiped other gods, and they had a relationship with God or their gods in the same way the Mesopotamians had, and that was that the gods needed to be manipulated or pleased or served in some way so that the gods would do what the Egyptians wanted. The tradition that we're a part of as Christians ends up seeing God in a very much different light than ancients saw their gods, and that contrast is made most clear by incessant interaction with Egypt. So we will be in and out of Egypt in this narrative going forward until after the Passover event and the freeing of the slaves, the Israelite slaves from Egypt. And it's a very important role. So we'll unpack it thoroughly over the next coming months as we continue to go through lessons. But we should always be aware anytime Egypt is a part of the story or a foray into Egypt is a part of the story, there are several levels of meaning that are going on. Not only was it historically remembered and I think accurate, but it also serves symbolic duty in the way that it's written about and in the contrast that is drawn. In this encounter with Abram and Sarai and Pharaoh, excuse me, the basic relationship is set. It's always the case that the Canaanites, the Israelites, the chosen people, whatever name you want to call them, go into Egypt out of need. They're driven there by lack of necessity in other parts of the world. And once in Egypt, by hook or by crook, in some way, they gain wealth and power, and then they are either cast out or they leave Egypt. So the story can loosely be understood that God sends his people to Egypt through a variety of needs or situations. And in Egypt, they get what they need, and then they leave again. So that relationship, again, obviously describes what will happen when Joseph brings his brothers and family and tribe into Egypt, and then becomes very powerful. And then in the end, Moses will lead them out of Egypt after they have acquired immense wealth and other kinds of power. It's just how it is. The contrast between what it means to be a Jew and what it means to be an Egyptian, and Egypt standing for Mesopotamia, the Hittite Empire, all of the other great empires of the ancient world. It's drawn intentionally and frequently. So let's get to the section that I started out talking about, which is what in the world do we do with the fact that the first leader of our faith tradition, Abram, gets to Egypt and says to Sarah, well, you're a beautiful woman, and here's the deal. When Pharaoh's men come to check us out at the border crossing, you're going to say, I'm your brother, and they'll give you to Pharaoh, and you'll be a part of Pharaoh's harem. That's just bizarre and hard to wrangle with and seems wrong. It also gives us a passage into some very important construct and ways to understand the story as it evolves. So at this point in the story, Abram knows Yahweh, but he doesn't know him intimately, and he doesn't know him even as fully as he will come to be known. God for Abram, Yahweh for Abram, would have probably seemed to be his household God or his personal God. We don't know that Abram would have been a radical monotheist, or maybe he was, but what he knows about God is not very full at all. And so Abram is a human being in history who is more Mesopotamian than he is Jewish. He's not Jewish really at all, not in the way that we think of being Jewish. and he was raised in the culture of Mesopotamia and has the norms and the morals and the ways of seeing things that Mesopotamians do. So while we might account it a sin, it's not a sin because the law isn't known to that point. And what Abram does with Sarah was common practice. It can't be or shouldn't be judged by modern morality or ethical standards because Abram was being very ethical and he was being normal. Remember, in Mesopotamia, women of childbearing age were taken by the state and put into state prostitution, the cult of prostitution, in order to have children. And they were honored. They weren't seen as people who were dishonored or enslaved by the state. It was a great honor to have your daughter go and to be a cult prostitute and to give birth to children, the whole thing being about the birth rate. So when Abram says to Sarah, look, let's be smart and not get ourselves in trouble, just tell him you're my sister, he's observing a norm, which is a married woman. It was unethical and immoral, considered to be in the ancient world, for a ruler to take a married woman for no good reason into his harem. But to take a sister, that was normal and done all the time. And so between Abram and Sarah, he's not asking her to do something demeaning or horrible for herself. He's asking her to acquit herself well and to help both of them by doing what women did in that time. It's just a whole different set of ways to look at the world. I'm not saying that by modern standards they're right, but what I am pointing out is, given what Abram knew and given how he had been raised and what was normal, he was acting in a way in keeping with good ethics and good sense, for that matter. In addition, after he does that, he's not punished by God. He's rewarded by God because God lights up Pharaoh in some way, and Pharaoh recognizes, likely from Pharaoh's viewpoint, that he has messed with Abram's God, finds out that she is his wife, not his sister, and then he loads him up with goods and money to pay the debt that he would owe to Abram's God, and sends him off. Yahweh in that whole story is not shown as being angry or upset that Sarah is used the way that she is. We're going to see that exact same story play out again later in the narrative, and it'll be the exact same scenario. Sarah is doing for her family what women did, and she would have actually been greatly honored. The story in its original telling and original writing would have been a story that was meant to honor and show Sarah as a woman of high integrity and a woman who valued her marriage to Abram and was happy to do what she was supposed to do, what was common for women to do in order to benefit both of them. So it's a good lesson for us because we'll confront our modern sensibilities in this ancient text over and over again. Abram doesn't know the laws of God because the laws of God have not yet been written. Abram is keeping in concert with the way that he has been enculturated by his birthplace and by the culture that raised him, and no one is offended by it at all. If a modern interpreter says that they are offended by it or says that the Judeo-Christianity should be tossed aside or who would want to worship a God that does that, they do so because they came preloaded to it and they're just looking to see the Bible through the lens of modern ethics and prove the point that women have always been put upon and treated as second-class citizens. It isn't true at all. It isn't accurate historically, and it certainly isn't accurate academically to say that. It's a front-loaded game that people are playing to use the Bible for their own purpose. In reality, whether you're a person of faith or whether you're not, if you're watching this Bible study and participating in it, you should know it just was normal for the time. It wasn't upsetting. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in Scripture, because by modern standards, it would make Abram look bad. Leads us to one more concept that we'll talk about over and over and over again. What we see, beginning with Abram and then going through all the patriarchs and clear until much later in the Old Testament, is called progressive revelation. The people of God were taught about God by God a little bit at a time. God didn't start with the Ten Commandments and the many laws that follow after that with Abram, because they would have been nonsensical. He wouldn't have known what to do with them. God started with Abram by revealing his presence and making promises about what he was going to do for him. And he will teach Abraham and Sarah and their offspring, the patriarchs and the tribes, the people of God, all along the way. And each time there's a new teaching, a new interaction with God, more revelation is made about the character of God and the desire of God for his people. Progressive revelation means that when we look at these things, we should hold them to the standard that they would have actually been practicing. It should also mean that we understand, oh, that's how to understand the Old Testament. God is progressively better known because he reveals himself more and more to people as they have learned previously about him and as they are ready to receive the new lesson. Progressive revelation is a big deal as a way to understand Scripture and keep scriptural authority and integrity intact. So let's end today with this. Along the lines of progressive revelation, God has made himself known first to Abram's father and then to Abram, and he has asked of Abram that he go to a certain place, to a land, Canaan, which is by and large not an empire or a solidified nation. It's the wild, wild west. And he said, look out over the land that you see and know that I'm going to fill it with your offspring, right? Your name is going to be held in esteem for generations and generations. And these are the promises I make for you. And then God begins to send Abram to different places, and he will also begin to interact and require things from Abram. So the relationship has started between God and his chosen people. That begins with Abram. That's why we're children of Abraham ourselves, and the Jews and the Muslims, because all of us look to Abram as the first one that interacted and came to know and have a relationship with Yahweh. So when we see the story unfold and come to understand and interpret it, we'll be looking through those lenses. The historical lens is really important to understand the ethics and the morals that go on, because other than that, they're hair-raising. It's also important to understand that what we see is a record of God's slow revealing of God's self, and that we grapple with that and come to understand. For what it's worth, as an individual, I have noted about myself, I have learned about God in the same way. My childish understanding of who God was pretty much Santa Claus. A Santa Claus who was always around, and if I prayed right, maybe I'd get what I prayed for. But God has revealed himself through Scripture and through the witness of other Christians and through the process of walking with him over my lifetime to be much, much better than anything I could think of as a child. And the relationship that I enjoy with him is much fuller, and the results of that relationship are much better for me. It all takes time. It's progressive in our accumulation of knowledge as well as our comfort in the relationship. So short lesson for today, we'll talk in more depth, having planted the seed for these concepts and ways that we're going to be looking at it. The last thing is when God sends Abram to Negev, it is the same place that we talked about in the last lesson, which is scholars think all of these wanderings, the center place that Abram returns to time and time again, is supposed to be the cornerstone of the temple that will come in a couple thousand years after the time of Abram. So that's what I got for you today. I hope that you're enjoying the Bible study. Again, we'll be trying to put together a Zoom in a few weeks whenever I feel like we have enough material to work with and enough concepts explored. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll talk to you next week.